It was absolutely terrifying when you're 27 years old to see how this man is just manipulating his bands and his staff and really ruling under fear. And it worked.
Welcome, everyone. This was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, here are some people I'd like to interview if you have a connection. Greg from Go-Kart, The Lunatics, Dan Adriano, Just About Tuesday, Raina Maria, Ace from the Early November, Steve Evitz, and that's just to name a few. So if you have any contacts with them, let me know or message me on Instagram, or you can email me at thiswasthescene@gmail.com. Victory Records is a Chicago-based record label founded by Tony Brummel. It operates a music publishing company called Another Victory, Inc., and is the distributor of several record labels. It has featured many prominent artists including Thursday, Hawthorne Heights, Silverstein, Taken Back Sunday, Bayside, Streetlight Manifesto, and A Day to Remember. Some of the Victory bands I've interviewed include Doug from The Sleeping, Andrew from Strife, Mark from Shutdown, and I also interviewed Double J, who used to work for Victory for 10 years as a designer who was basically their art director. In September 2019, years after buying part of the label's catalog, Concord bought Victory Records and Another Victory for $30 million fucking dollars. Craft Recording has been managing Victory Records catalog since Concord acquired the label. Victory has since not signed any new bands or released new records. Instead, the label operates for the current distribution of the label's alumni as well as for reissues. Victory's catalog includes 4,500 master recordings and 3,500 compositions through its publisher Another Victory. Monika has been listening to the show for a while and would always kind of message me with some random stories about the people I've interviewed. And I found out she worked for Victory a while back, and one day we were messaging and she was like, yeah, I'd like to tell some stories. And I was like, let's fucking do this, since nobody else really likes to shed any light of what was going on at this label. I think folklore says it was interesting, if I'm just going to be kind of middle ground here. So there's a lot of good stories in here, and I think a lot of people who are looking to learn about this label, this will shed some light on her perspective for the couple years that she worked there. I got her on the Skype, and this is what we talk about. What could they listen to at the office? The cops showing up? The holiday party? Did the staff know about the deals bands were getting? The sleeping? The Damnation AD showcase? Blackberries? 360 deals? The soda machine story? Freezing checks, and a ton more. Lastly, if you're not following the Instagram, just go on Instagram and look up This Was The Scene. I post teasers leading up to every interview. I also just post some random fun shit that I just think of in the story section. I'll do polls and just, I don't know, random things I think about when I'm out getting drunk because I think it's funny as shit. So go follow that, and that's all. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. So with this, you gave me a list of a bunch of stuff you wanted to talk about. So basically we're going to focus on talking about Victory Records and your time there. From the whole time period of Victory, where did you come in and leave?
Sure. So I came to Victory from ASCAP, which is a publishing company. And I had been brought to the company by two other Victory employees. And I had actually worked on all of the Victory publishing that they had just set up. I had worked on their catalog, so people from Victory were like, you should come work here. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. So I came in, I think my very first week was the day that the Hawthorne Heights lawsuit was announced. What's super funny about that is I spoke to Hawthorne Heights' lawyer probably daily at ASCAP because he represented Nelly and Hawthorne Heights, and he was just a St. Louis guy. And I had told him I was going to Victory, and clearly he couldn't say, oh, we're going to sue that label, but I just thought it was funny. No one could warn me that it was about to go south very quickly.
So you grew up in Chicago, right?
I did.
And you know Double J?
Yes, I do.
Did you just know him because of Victory?
Yes. So Double J is from a small town outside of Chicago, and I grew up in the city. I probably saw him at shows, but I don't remember him.
So I think what I want to do is kind of bring it up to you getting to Victory in a short span, because I have kind of a limited, not really too much of a limited time, but I really want to cram a lot in. How long before Victory did you get into the industry, and what were your steps from that first job to Victory?
You talked to Zach from Thick, and he had said that, I was around a lot. So I decided pretty early on that I wanted to work in music. And so essentially I started working at a college radio as their marketing person. And I was working with all the venues in the city, so the Metro and the Fireside, on getting, tickets to give away on air. That is how I met Zach from Thick, by sitting at the bar BSing. Zach had told me, oh, the ASCAP office is in my building and they're hiring, so you should apply there. The ASCAP office in Chicago was really trying to reach they had the kind of hip hop community on lock, but they were working on the alternative scene. And at that time, big things were happening. Rise Against was coming up. Like the Lawrence Arms were doing well. Alkaline Trio was doing well. And they didn't have anybody that kind of knew that world. So I think that's probably why I got the job. I was there for 4 years. I set up Rise Against publishing company and, Lawrence Arms and things like that. And then I realized there was nowhere to go because my boss wasn't going to die anytime soon. And it was a 2-person office. So I was like, well, let's figure out, Victory seems interesting. I mean, I had already, people had told me, obviously, I grew up at the Fireside, and those bands were not cool to those people. So they were like, are you sure? And I was like, I can do this. It's going to be fine. And everybody warned me, because there were people that hung out at the Fireside that had worked for Tony in screen printing or were in a band that Tony had been mean to. So I knew, but I had friends that worked there and they seemed fine. And then once I got in there, it was clearly not fine.
So prior to all this, it sounded like you grew up, you were a scene kid, right?
Yes.
How'd you get involved in it?
I went to high school in the city, and I had a friend that was into it, and I was a nerd, but I was not smart enough for the nerds, not smart enough or not weird enough for the theater kids. And my first show was a band called the Bullweevils. That was just really eye-opening for me to see people of color and all different races were there. And I was like, this is the most inclusive, welcoming thing I've ever seen in my life. I absolutely want to be a part of this.
So basically, the shows that you went to, like you said, Fireside, Metro, and then Legion Hall shows around in the suburbs and all that.
I didn't really go to the suburbs because,
because you're bougie.
Yeah, kind of. I was like, that's far, So very much a snob about that. I'll admit that. So no, I didn't do the Arlington Heights thing. A friend of mine always makes fun of me. He's like, I never saw you at the Arlington Heights hardcore shows. And I was like, I went to public school in the city. I have enough problems. I'm going to go to the ska show at the Fireside because I need to have a good day. So
you get to grow up around all these amazing bands when they were coming up.
Mm-hmm.
That's so fucking cool.
It was a really magical time and place. I talk with Zach about it all the time, and that'll never be the same.
I was talking to somebody yesterday, and he was like, there's no punk scene anymore. I'm like, well, there is. There actually, if you watch YouTube, there's bands that are younger, and there is a crazy scene. A lot of people go off for them. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the unity is in that scene. I don't know if they all go there and they leave and they talk about, because you go to a show and you get pamphlets or someone, and people would learn about veganism, or they learn about straight edge, or they learn about something, or they would just go to a coffee shop. I don't know I wonder what they do now.
I don't know, because it's definitely not the sense of community that we had, because just like you said, you would all meet up at the American Legion Hall or at wherever it was, and you started to recognize each other and you became friends, and that was just it. I've been friends with the same people I've been going to shows for over 20 years now. So
yeah. So when you get to Victory, let's start talking about what starts going down, and also you've heard we started messaging each other a couple years ago, last year,
mm-hmm.
And because you would be like, oh, listen to this episode. So have you heard the ones that had the Victory bands on it?
I don't think I have.
Like Strife?
No, I didn't. I mean, I know what they're going to say. So that's the thing. I know what they're going to say.
Yeah, but they don't really, no one really, that's the thing about this interview is I never really want to have a bashing episode. I'm more intrigued because there's such a mythos, I guess, around Victory. And in any of the bands that I talk to, they kind of tiptoe around it, and they'll never be like, this is how it really was. So this is why I'm interested to see what your perspective is from the inside, and you could speak as however you want to.
Yeah, I can't really rip on Victory too much because,
and that's not the point. It doesn't have to be like that. It's
absolutely. I wouldn't have gotten half the jobs I got, afterwards if I hadn't worked at Victory. After Victory, I got a job at Universal Republic in the A&R department. And it's because I worked at Victory. And then the job I got after that was because you worked at Victory, and it was kind of like like a calling card of like, I can handle a lot of shit. For that, I'll always be grateful to Tony. But outside of that, there's definitely some crazy stories that are just too weird to be true.
I can't wait.
I mean, I can tell you about my first day, which was just how I knew I'd made a very, strange choice was.
Yeah, let's go for it.
I decided to like be like an adult and get there early. And again, this was not my first job. I'd already been at ASCAP for like 4 years. So I felt pretty good about myself and confident. So I got to work early and I was like, all right, I'm in charge of the licensing. I'm going to start looking through this catalog and, see where we're at with all these things and just check even on the paperwork, the registrations, are these all up to date? I'm at my desk and I'm listening to the Beastie Boys just because it's my first day and I'm in the zone and I'm looking at paperwork and contracts and whatever. And Tony comes storming over to my desk. He's like, what are you listening to? What's this? It's like, completely taken aback. I was like, what, am I listening to something with too many swear words? What's going on? And he's like, is that one of our artists? And I was like, no. It's like, how can you work for me if you don't know everything about my artists? And I was like, oh, okay, day one, right? So I was like, well, shit, all right, let's fire up some Aiden. I don't know, I was like just going through the like it was bananas. And I was like, this man is very serious, obviously. And that was the rule. Like we were not allowed to listen to other bands or, that weren't on our label.
So they had to be just on rotation with Victory bands inside the office.
Yes. And then we had, we spent a lot of money on Fuse TV. So it was like a combination. We had Fuse TVs everywhere because we spent like a shit ton of money on advertising there. So you would hear like Fuse TV coming in one ear and then, somebody listening to the audition in the other, and it was just constant.
So what year did you get there?
I want to say if I look up the year of the Hawthorne Heights lawsuit, let me do that because I'm like, what year was it? So hold on.
Because it says it was the record label itself was founded in 1989, if Wikipedia is correct.
Yes, I was not there then.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that old, actually.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Tony has a lot of cred. 2006, boom. And that was my very first week.
Okay, so that's about 1989. So that's about 17 years into the label, and obviously we're going to fill the gaps in the middle, but when you how many years did you stay there?
2.
Oh, you're only there 2 years. Okay, and then when did they got bought out, right?
That was like 3 years ago. Concord bought them for $30 million.
Yeah, so, Jesus Christ. Okay, so I didn't realize they were around for that long after. I always thought they ended in like the late 2000s or the...
No, Tony kept plugging along. He was very determined to, maintain that until somebody offered him a shit ton of money and he was like, never mind.
Okay, so what was like the staff like there?
So the staff was really very interesting and cool. A lot of them, this was their first job at all. It was very common for like the secretary to be promoted to a publicist. They were all very young and very excited. The people that brought me into it were both in the publicity department and they were very like knowledgeable and very respectable and wonderful people. And then within, I want to say 3 months of me starting, they both left. And I was like, fuck. That was the only kind of support system I had because I was not used to somebody yelling at me all the time. I was not used to having to answer an email back at 5:45 a.m. And they were kind of showing me the ropes and I trusted them because I knew them from going to shows and things like that. And now they're gone and then just left me here essentially.
What was like the common age range of the staff?
Probably 24.
Okay. 24
to 27. And I was a little old, so I was probably 27 at the time.
And how old was Tony at that point, do you know?
Oh, I have no idea. So Tony had to be at the most like 41.
So I have this whole list, and I don't know really what the order is. I mean, you've got hacking in personal emails, the paycheck getting froze, a meltdown, took away soda machine, Christmas party thing. I don't know. I just kind of go in order and be like, all right, let me just go from the beginning to this, and here's some stories that pop up.
Absolutely. So like I said, my very first day, I got screamed at for listening to a non-Victory artist. That was a good time. Probably a month or so into it, and at this point, I'm just like kind of absorbing what's happening. About a month in, the sheriff comes to the office to serve Tony legal papers, and Tony is not there. He obviously had gotten wind of this. Tony was in the middle of this lawsuit, and we could hear everything. I could especially hear everything that was happening. Tony screaming at lawyers and things because my desk was situated right outside his office. When the sheriff came, God bless our receptionist, she was very young and just didn't know what to do to like 2 people in, sheriff's uniforms holding weapons asking for Tony. And she's like, And God bless her, she gave them a sampler. I was like, oh my God.
Wait, which one?
I don't know. I was like, what are you doing? She's like, I didn't know what to do.
Do you like Snapcase?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, fuck, God bless her. She's adorable. And I was like, well, this is bananas. So that was just kind of the culture, like everyone was very scared of Tony at all times because he's in the middle of being sued, and it's all over the media. So like he is extra crazy. So super sensitive, really high strung at this juncture. I can tell you we had a holiday party and we were super excited to go to that because we were like, oh, finally. Because Tony was like an abusive husband. Like he'd be super mean to you. And then we ordered pizza and we were like, and we're young and that worked. It really did. We were like, all right, well, that was yesterday. He was an absolute a-hole and like sent out these really scathing emails. But then today we had pizza. Typical, just abusive kind of situation where you're like, that's great. So this time Tony was like, you guys are working really hard. We're going to have we're going out. The whole team's going out. We're going to play whirly ball and we're going to have food and drinks. And we're like, fuck yeah. It had been like a really rough week. It's in the middle of the day. We didn't know about it beforehand. So he's like, let's go. So we all pack up and we go to a place called Whirly Ball. It's like open bar and like Tony's buying people shots and it's like 2:30. Maybe 1 o'clock, something along those lines. We're just
in the afternoon?
Absolutely. 1 p.m. Okay. 2:30, and we're like having a great time and just having a good time. And then Tony's like, about 2 hours in, mind you, he's been buying people drinks and shots for like the last hour and a half. It's like, all right, everybody, we're back to our desks. And like, what? Half the staff is absolutely fucking hammered, like just wasted because we haven't had food. And he's like, all right, we're going back. And some people drove back to the office and some people did not. And there was definitely a price to pay for those that did not go back to the office in terms of screaming, or Tony would do really weird shit. Like if he was mad at you, he would move your desk. There was a time when he was so mad at the radio department because we weren't getting enough ads that he replaced their desks with little kids' school desks. So you have like these 27 or 30-year-old grown men whose desks have been taken away and they're sitting at grammar school fucking kids' desks. And you just like, they're like, oh, Tony took the desks away. He's mad at us. He said if we're going to act like kids, he's going to treat us like kids. And I was like, this can't be like, it was shit like that where you're like, no one would believe this. If you were to have like an office tour, you would walk past the radio department and there's grown men sitting at these tiny tables, just like, all right.
Did you give like bands a heads up when they were getting signed to the label at that point?
So at one point, Tony was interested in signing Lucero. I had been working with Lucero from an ASCAP standpoint, just helping them set up their publishing. I knew their manager and I was like, don't do it. I tried. This is kind of one of the reasons I think that I couldn't stay very long at Victory was I came from ASCAP, which was everybody loves songwriters, get your money, get your publishing. And then I went to Victory where it was like, Tony keeps all your publishing and there's no money in it for the artist. And I would notice things like, because Tony didn't want to open mail or, things like that. At one point we were getting royalties from Touch Tunes for the Taking Back Sunday album that's on Warner Brothers. And I was like, we're collecting these royalties. Fuck, these are not even our record. And so, I reached out to their manager and I gave her privately and I gave her the heads up. And I was like, just so you know, this is happening, because I couldn't in good faith, coming from where I'd come from, just be like, yeah, that's fine. And I would have conversations with bands offline. We all would, but I would have conversations with bands offline. They really appreciated it because Tony was very vindictive with his artists. Like there was a time when The Sleeping missed a flight from coming back from Atlanta because I had booked them on, like, it was dumb, the kids, like Cartoon Network. And they were doing like a live performance on the Cartoon Network. And they missed their flight. And it was the middle of the day. And it was clearly because, they're band dudes. And so they called me like, Monika, we missed our flight. And I was like, fuck, and we all had Amexes. And I was like, all right, let me tell Tony, problem number one. And so Tony's like, absolutely not. Leave them there. And I was like, what? No. I had to like wait an hour and a half, go to my car and, with the Victory Amex, because I was like, all right, he won't know about this for a month. Get them on another flight. And then I was like, I'll eat this shit sandwich 30 days from now.
Jesus Christ. Like, the Taking Back Sunday thing, like how bad did the office know how bad the deals were that bands were getting?
No, because again, everyone's like 24 to 27 years old, and they don't really know. And I had a little bit more insight because I had worked in publishing and I understood kind of like intellectual property and things like that. I wasn't there for this. Hawthorne Heights, when they went gold for the first record, they had like a boat party. I was not working there, but this is a very famous story. The record had gone gold. They take him out on a boat, having a fancy dinner and drinks and whatever. And Tony thought he was being like a big, and we thought he was too, being a big guy. Gives them each a check for $5,000. This record is gold. You're giving them $5,000 each for a gold record? And I think when that happened, the other people on the team were like, maybe this isn't exactly fair.
What would a band what should they have gotten for a gold record?
Typically, in a major label contract, there's points, if you get to this many, if you sell this many records, you will get this dollar amount. When you're at a gold record status, that should have been, they probably should have started earning out for one, which is something that Tony wasn't great at in terms of paying their royalties. So that could have easily been $50,000.
Like 50,000. Oh, okay, 50,000 split between.
Yeah. At the time, everyone was like, even the band was offended. They were like, when you go out on the road, you're not making a ton of money. And there was no tour support. So it was basically them out there, and you're covering with the cost of the bus and manager cuts and things like that. So, you're barely breaking even when you're on the road. And this was like the first time Victory had a gold record, I think. No, it was the second. Taking Back Sunday had already gone gold, but that was really shitty. And we didn't really know. We knew that Tony was mean to the bands. We just didn't know how crappy he was with them on the contract side. And what's funny, Tony gave out deal memos, and it was one page. And there was this is completely abnormal in the music industry, and it's one page. And I still have a copy of it because a band that I'm still working with, The Sleeping, were like, do you have a copy of that deal memo? And I was like, as a matter of fact, I do. And it's just one page, and it doesn't talk about publishing. It doesn't talk about any kind of how much money they're going to spend on advertising or anything like that. It doesn't talk about splits for the publishing or, even the royalties. And it's basically one page and sign here. And Tony gave that to everybody until probably A Day to Remember.
Why? Why was it different then?
Well, A Day to Remember absolutely took him to the cleaners for giving out the deal memo, whereas nothing is covered in a deal memo. It basically says here, you're under contract for 4 records. And then Tony would do things like Aiden's a prime example. Aiden did a live record or a covers record. Nope, that doesn't count towards your 4 records.
Really?
Yeah, but it doesn't say that in the contract because it's a deal memo.
Oh, wow.
So you would be out there putting out records that don't count, that you think are counting towards what you owe Tony. So say Tony will sign you to 2 records, and then if you do well, up to 4. So typically I think the deal was 4 records, and it would just be impossible to get out. The Sleeping got a notification from Concord just recently, and this is happy to talk about it.
Just recently, now recently?
Just recently. So Concord bought Victory, and I'm working with The Sleeping. And we were like, all right, let's try and get our affairs in order. You have 89,000 listeners a month on Spotify, which I know is not a lot in terms of dollars because Spotify pays very little.
Yeah.
It's let's see where we're at with royalties. Concord buys Victory for $30 million, and probably for the back catalog, they're looking to exploit Taking Back Sunday, Atreyu, Hawthorne Heights, and do whatever with it. But the accounting team comes back to us and they're like, oh yeah, well, we're not going to give you any royalties because you're actually in the red with us for $180K. How is that possible? That's the bookkeeping that was shared from Tony to Concord. And I'm like, especially The Sleeping. I know exactly how much we spent on videos. I know exactly how much we spent on advertising. There was no tour support. How do we owe you $180,000? We're in the unrecouped. It's $180,000 unrecouped.
Wait, so did they spend $180,000 on?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So how's that number come about?
That's Tony math, and we could never understand it. So Tony would always say oh, it's a 50-50 deal with the artist on the publishing side after you recoup. And that to me seemed fair. I was like, all right, well, it costs money to put out a record and Tony is paying for that. So I get it. After the band recoups, it's a 50-50 split. That seems reasonable, except nobody ever recoups. And the reason being is like, oh, well, I spent this much money on a Fuse ad. I spent this much money on a, AP ad. Well, what he fails to point out is that Fuse ad has 11 victory bands in one commercial. That AP band has, 11 victory bands on one page. Things like this. And there's no hard and fast bookkeeping. There's no tour support. So I would love to know how this band is $180K in arrears. They were given only a video budget once, and they put out 3 videos. The other 2 were somehow made for free because Tony was that cheap. We did them on the roof of, the building, things like that. It's just staggering. And Concord is not they don't want to fight about it. They bought it. That's what they believe. This is the bookkeeping that they have. And yeah.
Did he kind of live a lavish lifestyle that you could see? Like, would he come in and drive a Benz and?
Oh God, yeah. Tony he still does. He has a very large warehouse essentially that he has refurbished, and it is. I will say the last time I was in it, it is very Miami Vice. It is just glass brick kind of walls and fish tanks, and his wife drove a ridiculously bright yellow, huge SUV of some sort. Tony drove a huge SUV. I think it was, I don't even know what it was, but it was a fancy, expensive one. He absolutely enjoyed that.
Was he ever in debt?
I don't know.
Because I'm thinking someone like that, if they're constantly that hot-headed all the time, it's either that's just how they're wired, or he's spending so much money that he's putting himself in a hole and he's freaking out, and that's why he's going nuts at the office. But that's just a total guess.
That's possible, but I'm also trying to imagine what it must have been like to be at that time. Tony was wild. He would send out these nasty emails to not an exaggeration, Steve Jobs.
What?
Oh yeah.
Wait, someone talked about that, I think, because of all the iTunes and stuff.
Yeah, and he copied one of my coworkers, and he's like, "We will never do this. You are ruining, the album." He was not wrong there. He's like, you can't cherry pick songs. It takes away from the album. But he said something very nasty to Steve Jobs in terms of his health. I hope you get sick or something like that. And, we all know where that went.
Oh, wow.
There was an email that I got copied on, and I don't even know why, to Lior from Def Jam. And I was like, are you I know, I'm 27 years old, and I think that this guy's, Lior's the coolest guy ever, obviously. I'm like, my name is on copy on this email to him that is very nasty, telling him, to go fuck off for whatever reason. And I was like, why are you copying your employees on these mean-ass emails? I'm 27. I'm like, oh, he's going to remember my name if I ever apply there. No, he won't. But, when you're 27, you freak out.
You said the sleeping, you still work with them?
Yes.
How? They're not even a band.
That's not true.
Well, they haven't played a show since, what, 2011?
We're playing St. Vitus in February.
Well, I saw that, and I talked to Doug. He was one of the very first interviews. He told me a little bit. I feel like every band is always, like I said earlier, just afraid to talk their real feelings about the label.
I don't know why.
It's weird. I don't get it.
I don't know why, but we are at a point right now, what this I can say for the sleeping, where they're absolutely going to talk about it. It's not right. They're
going to talk about the thing that's happening right now with Concord.
With Concord, there's nothing you can do about that. That is dead and gone, right? They bought the label. That's what they're told that the bookkeeping was, and it's just not worth it to fight.
Oh, so basically, so basically all the Spotify downloads and whatever merch they'd probably be still selling out there somehow. That's the record would be you're never going to see a cent of that until we get the 180,000 back. Yes,
in theory, until that's recoupment. So I popped on their Instagram not long ago, and they're repressing Silverstein records, and I'm like, Silverstein's not going to see any of that. So it's shitty. That's just how he was running a business, and it was absolutely terrifying when you're 27 years old to see how this man is just manipulating his bands and his staff and really ruling under fear. And it worked.
I'm on the website now. I guess this is just, they have it up there because they're just repressing old stuff because nothing new is coming out in the label anymore, right?
No.
Yeah. So, were they the ones who did that Taking Back Sunday 20th anniversary thing?
I think Victory might have pressed that if they hadn't, depending on the timeline of when Concord purchased it, but Victory was pressing some vinyl, like the Taking Back Sunday and stuff, so.
This makes me hate that I bought that record.
I'm sorry.
When it came out. Because I mean, I don't really know how the whole industry works. I mean, obviously bands, you know way more about this, but I pay like a monthly thing for Spotify. Obviously that's not even enough, but I'm buying all these records and vinyl and stuff, and I'm hoping that bands get that. But it sounds like if that's the kind of deal that Sleeping had, that means that a majority of them probably have the same thing, and they're never ever going to see anything, or they never even saw money to begin with.
A record deal is essentially a loan. The label is the bank, and the band is never really going to recoup. It's in the label's best interest for them not to recoup.
Have you ever seen a band in the industry outside of Victory that has recouped?
I mean, probably the Rolling Stones, like something on that level. I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of a band that's like on the, probably some radio rock bands have recouped.
What about like Rise Against though? Like, don't they make money?
I'm sure Rise Against has recouped. They are on a new label right now, and they probably got a very favorable deal terms. But it's labels that's never really a fair shake for the band. It just isn't. Yeah,
like I'm seeing on the website, you got like they have Snapcases, Progression Through Unlearning. They're selling that on vinyl. They've got some Thursday T-shirts and vinyl. It's like a box set. Man, that's such a dick thing.
I don't know what to say about it. I saw on the Victory Instagram that like someone got video of like Jeff looking at the Thursday box set, and I'm very surprised that he didn't pop off.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get why people really never say anything bad. Not like, and again, this is coming across as just very informative, and I'm not like, oh, fuck this guy. But at the same time, if I was the person in the thick who got wronged in some way by somebody else, I would be like, you know what, man, this is some shitty things that went down. But no one ever really says that.
And that's the thing, Tony had, when I was there when A Day to Remember got signed, and A Day to Remember's drummer was 16 at the time, so his mom had to sign the contract for him. You're talking about very young people that have no industry experience, and I think A Day to Remember was like from Ocala, Florida. They didn't have a lawyer. They just want to sign, and that's what it is. And people ask the Sleeping as an example, like, oh, why would you sign? Because they shared a practice space with Taking Back Sunday, and they knew exactly how terrible Tony was. But they signed to Victory with the hopes that something would happen like with Taking Back, where they got bought out. Mm. And that really never happened again.
What's the Damnation AD creepy showcase?
Tony had always listen, I will never begrudge Tony his history and his legacy in the hardcore community, and that he had absolutely a hand in building it. Well, I 100% agree with that. But he kept trying to figure out how he was going to position the label, and he's oh, we're going to get back to our roots. And then he's like, oh, wait, shit, that doesn't make money. Things like that. He's like, he was going to start like a Jamaican, like a reggae music label. That was at one point going to happen.
Okay.
He wanted to start a country label. So Tony was just all over the place. And, we would have these showcases, and they're super creepy and weird for the artists, because Tony would rent out a showcase room at one of the fancier practice spaces in Chicago. And it's a very nice setup. It has lighting. It's a proper stage. And these bands would come in, and we would get a notice an hour ahead, all right, everybody drive over to Superior Street. We have a showcase. And we're like, we never knew who it was. We never knew anything. And it's this pitch black room. And we get there, and it's fucking Damnation AD. I'm like, what is this band doing here? And why am I the only person that is absolutely flabbergasted that this is happening? It's just, it was mind-boggling. And
wait, why though? What about that band made you so confused?
They're not dumb. Why would they be here? That band has great heritage, is beloved in the hardcore community. They absolutely must know. Why are you here? And I remember I was talking to a different band. I think it was a different hardcore band that was signed. And I was like, why did you sign? There's not a lot of money in this here. He's like, well, we're a hardcore band. There's no money in hardcore, but not in America, but in the States or in Europe. So we want to be on a label so that we can tour Europe. And I was like, oh, that might make sense.
Did you feel like you got some PTSD at that time from going to the office?
Oh my God. To this day, I have a real hard time not responding to an email within minutes of getting it because Tony was completely psycho. You know, he would send out these emails at 5 a.m., 5:45. And if you didn't write back, like one of Tony's catchphrases is, I'm here to win. And if you didn't write back, you're not here to win. You have to put points on the board. And like just little things that Tony would do that like I had a very hard time undoing because I was trained by fear. Immediately reply. Like, don't even think it through. Just fucking hit send, you know, because that was better than not replying and, you know, Tony thinking that you were sleeping past 5:30 a.m.
How many people did you see come and go in the 2 years you were there?
Oh, shit. I mean, there were people that would start and then be gone a week later, either by their own choice or by Tony's choice. Because it was wild. Like there would be, you know, Tony would be regularly screaming at the top of his lungs in the, you know, his office. He'd come through, there's like a long hallway in the office and like all the cubes were on either side. And he would, you know, come by and just like throw magazines, you know, at people's cubicles and be like, we're not getting enough press and this is bullshit. And you're like, I'm on a phone call, like trying to pitch music to, you know, Guitar Hero. And like Tony's like flipping out in the background. I'm like, haha, that's great. Sorry. You have to like build up steel. Like you just, and there would be people super excited. They're like 21 years old, just got out of college, you know, and they're like, I'm in, we're going to do this. And then a week later, they're crying.
Real quick, if you're looking for an explainer video or someone to do motion graphics for your company, check out my company, drive80.com, and you can email me at mike@drive80.com for more info. That's all I got to say. So now back to the interview. Would he talk about other record labels?
Tony, absolutely.
Like, what would he say? I mean, I'm sure he wasn't anything positive.
You know, I went to Republic after Victory, and he had sent an email to, there were two brothers that ran it, and he was like, oh, stealing my fucking employees again, blah, 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 you know, because he was mad at Republic because Hatebreed went to Republic somehow. Don't ask how that happened. He would talk shit about that. It's like all these major labels are just copying what we're doing, you know, and they're taking my employees because they're copying my formula. I'm like, okay. In terms of other labels on his side, I think he started to get upset at Fueled by Ramen, like, because they were starting to, like, just kill it with Paramore and things like that. He was looking to just kind of keep up with them.
Were there any labels that he respected?
No. Absolutely not. No. Tony did not respect anybody other than himself. Not one. I'm trying to think. I'm like, no, he did not have pleasant relationships with anyone. Anywhere. No.
I was just thinking of just Drive Through, and he'd be like, "Oh, respect them," because they're also ripping off all these bands as well.
When I heard those stories, I was like, "What? That can't be real." And then I think I told you I met them in real life. They came to Republic to take a meeting because at that time labels were buying up indies, like trying to be cool, and they had them in, and I was like, "Oh man!" And they would put me in those meetings because I was like the young hip person, you know, and it's like, oh, cool. So I was in this meeting and I was like, hey, super excited to have you guys here. You know, it's really excited to talking to you guys. And can you like, are we ever going to get another Movie Life record? And she just screamed at me and she was like, do you have $20,000 to record a Movie Life album? And I was like, no, I don't. I'm just like, that was a really weird time in the music industry. Like I'm sure you've read Dan Ozzi's book.
Yeah, the episode that launched today is with Ryan Green, who did all the like a ton of pretty much like every Fat record in the beginning of the label. And I was saying in the intro, I was like, oh, Fat Records, or like, or Fat Records, like the guy from that book says in the audiobook. Did you listen to the audiobook at all?
Yeah, I did. I forgot about that.
And I was like, I might be mixing that up with the Bad Religion one, because I know in that one the guy said something weird, but it was like the Warped Tour, and he said like Fat Records, and I was like, oh man, it's so bad. I mean, the book's great though. So, and I said that too. I was like, it's such an awesome book. Yeah, and that's the thing, because like I feel like, and we're going off talk about, I feel like it's the same, but I feel like a lot of the bands in that, the majority of the bands in that book were like, this sucked, but then you listen to Rise Against, and they're like, yeah, this is great. This has really worked out for us, and I was really surprised to hear that side of it.
I mean, I will give, people like to poop on Rise Against pretty often, but I will give them credit that they have been steadfast in their message and in their beliefs. And from the moment that they signed deals, none of them are fancy. They all still live in Chicago area. You know, they're not out in Benzes or anything like that. They maintain a sense of who they are.
Oh, I love Rise Against. Yeah, I've never had it. I know I appreciate the bands that want to get huge. Like I listened to Tranny, and she was just like, "Yeah, I've always wanted to be huge." And it's like, yeah, you should. I mean, if a band's driving a Benz and they've been touring for 20 years, I'm like, why wouldn't you be allowed to do that? This is some asshole who's been working out of some kid who could be like 24, could be working in the financial industry, making $500,000 a year after a year after college,
Absolutely.
and you're like, that's cool, like that's okay. But a band who's busting their ass and everyone's stealing all their music, like they're not allowed to live.
Yeah. And listen, it's a weird, dichotomy of like growing up in a punk rock community and then going to like work at an indie label and then a major label and like seeing how the money moves. And you're just like, oh, well, they've got to eat. I'm not going to shit on anybody for getting paid for what they've done and what they love. So,
What's the BlackBerry leash thing you wrote?
oh God, the BlackBerry. Oh, they're so Tony gave us all Blackberries, and this was, that was the time. And part of that was he would want immediate responses to emails because you have this BlackBerry. He could obviously call you because, that was the number one thing. And then he could email you, and then he could BlackBerry Messenger you. So there was 3 ways that Tony could find you at all times. Because we were so afraid of Tony because he was so manic and screaming all the time, all of us, had our BlackBerry glued to our hands around the clock. I was like 27 at the time, and this is really before smartphones. And my parents were like, that's not normal. And I was like, I know. But I was like, what if I get an email? Like, if I don't, petrified, that if I didn't reply fast enough, something was going to happen.
Well, I think it would to really point out that this is before iPhones, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but this was the first time you pretty much had email in your pocket.
Correct. And it was, it was just wild. And my parents were like, what are you doing? Put that down. I was like, no. Like, I have a photo that my roommate took of me literally sleeping with my BlackBerry in my hand.
Jesus.
It's bananas, but it worked.
Was there a point when you were there in the 2 years that you started to stop giving a fuck, like before you left, where you kind of chilled out a little bit, or were you just uptight the entire time?
I was never not uptight, but I started to recognize that, like, okay, I can be helpful to the bands. That's one thing I can do. Like, I can be an advocate for these bands, whether or not Tony likes it. I would, make sure that the band's, song registrations were correct. I would go, and even though they weren't getting paid for all of these placements that they were getting in video games, it's cool that they can show their parents, like, hey, I was in Madden, or hey, I was in FIFA. They're not going to get the money for it, and that sucks. But there's some consolation in that. Like, it gave me comfort to know that, like, I was at least helping them enjoy some of their time there. And I developed relationships with the bands because I was advocating for them on the side. I would let bands know. I was like, hey, this is an opportunity that's coming up. I don't know if Tony's going to let you do it, but this is a thing. I would talk to band managers on my other phone, like late at night. And that's actually how I got my job at Republic. Bayside's day-to-day manager was Nate Albert, who was in the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones.
Oh, yeah.
And he
He's
was
a bass player, right? Wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was he was an A&R consultant for Republic, and he was just literally getting paid to go look at bands. And he liked that I was honest and that I was forthcoming with like stuff that was happening, and he recommended me for that job, and I ended up taking that job eventually.
And you're still in the music industry, right?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay. So then how do you work with the sleeping?
I am helping. I'm managing them just because they trust me, and I've known them. I've known them for 17 years now.
So I'm always confused by bands that have a manager when they haven't been around. Midtown, they just toured and they had a tour manager and they had all this crew. And I'm like, how does someone hold on to a manager for years? Or do they just find someone when they start revving up and want to go out, and then they start putting the word out like, hey, can you do this? And then you step in, or do you just kind of get paid through the years to be their manager? Like, how does that work?
So, for example, some bands are on like a management roster, like let's say Crush, right? And Crush, the managers at Crush they'll be assigned 5 or 6 bands, and they're either active or they're dormant. And so, like, say, for example, if you have Fall Out Boy and they can be dormant for like 8 years and then they're active again, somebody's about to make some good money.
So they don't have to so Fall Out Boy doesn't have to pay Crush anything to keep them around for 8 years?
I don't believe so. They lose like 10 or 15% of all of their income.
Who, the band or the management?
The band, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the manager gets a cut of like everything.
Okay, yeah, I was confused by that because there's like bands that even like when I did the Say Anything interview, Max is like, yeah, here's talk to my manager. I was like, you have a manager? Like you're not even touring. Like doesn't it? Are you burning money?
No, so with the sleeping, it's much more of like a kind of like a family. When I moved to New York, Sal from the Sleeping was my roommate. They trust me, and I'm just helping them with like paperwork, for example. We're trying to figure out like how do we get dug out of this like hole with Concord? Like, okay, like how do we get paid for royalties? How do we get control of our Spotify account again so we can see our stats? Like shit like that. Because band guys, God bless them, that's not what their thing is. So I'm just an administrative assistant at this point.
When they play the shows in the show or shows in February?
The show right now, we're possibly doing more. We don't know yet.
Do they get to keep that money?
Yeah.
Okay, so like the label would say like, hey, anything you make is ours, but just because, so if they were on the label, then it would be that way, right?
So that's a 360 deal, and Tony started implementing those shortly thereafter, what you're saying, what you're talking about, which is you get a cut. Tony would get a cut of merch sales, ticket sales, and anything else.
Jesus.
A lot of bands that you see right now, like that are just signing to say Universal or whatever, a 360 deal is pretty standard. You have to be an artist of like great standing to somehow get around a 360 deal.
This is so amazing. I love that people get to hear this real transparent view of just how the industry works. And I'm just surprised. I think it's funny, like even before when I talked about the staff, it's of course they're younger staff, and of course the bands are 16 years old because they are just, that's when they have the most, I mean, that's when they're developing their talent and they have this raw emotion coming out, and that's you get these great songs.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that the majority of the bands are that age, but it's almost like thank God they are that age because I don't think we'd have any fucking music.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. Yeah. I don't work in the music industry anymore, and sometimes I miss it and sometimes I don't. But when I think about those kind of things, like a 360 deal, that fucking sucks. When Tony figured that out, like a light bulb went off in his head because Tony printed merchandise. You know, he's like, oh, I can print my T-shirts. You have to buy them from me to go on tour. And if we place your shirts at Hot Topic, we get a cut of that too. All the money was somehow winding up with Tony. And the bands kind of got smart, like towards the end, not smart, but Hot Topic was a big account and they would take a bunch of our shirts. So the bands, if they weren't already in a 360 deal, Tony implemented that kind of Hot Topic thing on top of it. So the bands that weren't in a 360 deal, they would make sure that the shittiest designs went to Hot Topic because they weren't going to make money on those anyways. You know, like the most generic, standard Bayside shirt, whatever, that's what you will find at Hot Topic. And the good ones are on tour.
What's the Webster's Dictionary of a 360 deal?
So 360 degrees, meaning there is revenue coming to the label from all sides, touring, merchandise, and then recorded revenue.
That's crazy. Like we played that show in Starland. The person comes up, she's like, okay, we got to count your merch because we take 20%. I was like, are you out of your fucking mind?
Yep.
20 fucking percent?
Yeah.
It was crazy. I was like, we're not even a band. And we like, and then
We
like
just lost money.
Yeah. They took like 200, like I think we sold like $1,000 that I gave her like $230 cash. I was just like, this is insane. And she's sitting there too, kind of like,
did she sell it for you or no? That was just a house cut.
no, I was the one selling it, man.
Yeah.
Like I designed the shit, sold it, like put my money in to buy it, and then we played the fucking show. And I'm like, I'm giving you money because your name is what's her face. She was nice, but it was her job. And even at the end when she came to collect, she was just like, okay, I'm here. Yeah, like, but it seemed like she hated that she had to do that, which I appreciated. And then I think I even said something, and I was counting. She's like, how about we just do this? And she's like, I'll just walk away. And I was like, all right, cool. Thanks for saving me the extra $20 or something that I didn't. And I'm looking at Midtown, and they've got just stacks and stacks of merch. I'm like, these guys are going to make a killing tonight and have to give thousands of dollars to this fucking club.
Yeah, I think they're starting to like rally against that, which is great because it's dumb. You know, like
Yeah.
the house already gets a huge cut. You need merch on top of that? It's
Well,
fucking
it's like I posted the other day. I was like, should a band get percentage of alcohol sales?
absolutely.
Yeah, and people were like, "Fuck yeah!" Actually, and a friend of mine was a bartender. They're like, "No," I'm going. Well, I'm not talking about a small venue. I'm talking about like a giant venue because the only reason anyone's there is to see the band. You know, the show sold out, or the show sells out when the first day you put the tickets out. It's not because people are going there to for the venue. They're going there for the fucking band.
Yeah.
And then the band's getting fucked. So it's like, hey, we should get 20% of your fucking liquor sales.
It's crazy. Like when I got to Victory, I thought I was pretty like savvy, because I'd come from ASCAP and I thought I knew some shit. And then I started figuring out just by talking to the bands, like, oh my God, they're losing money playing Warped Tour. You know what I mean? Like because the bus costs this much, and then like all this stuff, and then this is how much they're getting paid per day. And God bless Kevin Lyman. I would never speak an ill word of him, but they weren't getting a shit ton of money to play every day.
How much does it cost to rent a bus?
I think it's like somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a day.
Jesus Christ.
And so, yeah, it's bananas. And like Bayside after the accident, we're like, no more vans. We're only taking a bus. And I was like, okay, fair. I get that. But it was cutting into their profit margins. And 1 year for Warped Tour, I was able to get them like a bus wrap to like knock off. The WWE paid, I think, 20 grand. And they paid for the bus to be wrapped, but they gave the band 20 grand to have the bus wrapped in like a SummerSlam thing.
Oh, that's genius.
Yeah. And that was helpful, but if $20,000 knocked off the top wasn't that much.
What about 4 days?
Yeah. But it's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
So.
Oh my God. So there's a couple more stories here that I want to go through. You had the time that Tony had a meltdown and took away our soda machine because he couldn't find a spoon.
This story is classic. It's my favorite one ever. It was lunchtime or whatever, and a bunch of us had gone to the Cobra Lounge, which was it's still next to where the Victory office were. We were having lunch, and, Tony sends an email. He's like, so we had a communal kitchen at Victory, and it was nice. It had like, a microwave and a toaster and like plates and bowls and shit. And there was a dishwasher, and it was our responsibility to load the dishwasher, and like people, weren't great at it because everybody's 24 to 27. And we're at lunch, like minding our business, and we get this email from Tony, and he is flipping the fuck out because he can't find a spoon. A spoon. And he is just like, you guys are insolent, ungrateful assholes. This is bullshit. I put all this stuff in here for you guys, and I can't find a goddamn spoon. And he is losing his fucking cool. And like, I was at lunch with like 2 other people, and one person was like, I'm going back, because she just didn't want to be gone for too long. And I was like, I'm not going back. Because it was lunchtime. I was like, fuck this. I'm not cutting my lunch short. I will go deal with Tony's temper tantrum later. So finish lunch and like go back to my desk, and I'm going about my business. And like we had, like any record label, we have these big coolers like by the front with all the free Red Bulls that we got and all the big, the monsters and shit. But Tony was nice, and he did stock Coke and Diet Coke for us. And it was just like a bodega fridge, And the next thing we know, I'm minding my business, I'm on the phone, and I see somebody from the warehouse with a dolly, and he is wheeling, again, the layout of the office is there's a center aisle, and all the cubes are on the left and the right. And I see this guy from the warehouse wheeling the soda machine, like the soda thing, into Tony's office. And we're like, what the fuck? And then 5 minutes later, there's this email. He's like, until further notice, if I can't get any respect in this goddamn office, you can't have any fucking soda, and like, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, if you want utensils from now on, you bring them from home. And this story gets even better because it led to a firing. So that happens, and everyone's just like in shock. And now this will tie into another story about Tony reading our emails. Some of us were on an email thread, and like Tony had his favorites. Like there was definitely people at the label that could take a shit on his desk, and Tony would be like, excellent work, you're the best. And it was 9 times out of 10, it was male. And, they could do no wrong. So we were on a thread with 2 other people or 3 other people, and we're just like laughing about this. We're like, can you believe this fucking just happened? And like one of my coworkers like sent an email. She's like mocking Tony, where she had like a toilet on wheels. She's like, as of today, there are no bathroom privileges. If you have to go, bring it from home. And like, the other coworker responded, as of today, I'm selling, 40s from my desk. 20 bullshit, right? I'm like, okay. And I'm on this thread, and I'm just like, all right, this is whatever. I'm not really jumping in because I don't know why. The next morning, he calls in the girl who had sent the email about the toilet into his office. And he has her email that she had been sending printed. And he hands it to her. He's like, did you write this? And she's like, oh, God. Meanwhile, also on this thread is like the golden person, like whatever. And she's like, yeah, I wrote this. And he's like, what the fuck? Why would you? She's like, it's a joke, Tony. He's like, it's a joke? You think this is a fucking joke? And he's like screaming at her. And like, he's like, get the fuck out of here. You don't work here anymore. Like, you think everything's a joke? And this is crazy. She's like, you are a joke, Tony. I give her excellent props for that.
Oh my God.
He chased her down the fucking hallway, and out of the building.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He stopped by I think there was 3 doors that he had to go through, but by the time she got to the staircase, he stopped. But he definitely chased her through the office, down the hall, and through the first set of stairs.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, this is okay.
Is that intent of assault? Or I don't even know. I'm not a lawyer, but that sounds kind of illegal.
I don't know. I'm sure on some level, but again, everyone is 25 to 27 years old.
Oh
and,
my God.
So that was it. And that's one of the ways that I knew Tony was reading our victory emails was that, because it ties into how he froze my paycheck. So I'm not sure where in the timeline, if it was before the chasing the woman down the hall or after. It was probably after, because I had been communicating with Republic about a job, and I had gotten pretty smart about it, but here's where I fucked up. I put my Gmail on my BlackBerry, thinking that my Gmail on my BlackBerry was safe. Incorrect.
Really?
Yes. Somehow, some way, I had flown to New York for this interview on my own dime, because that's, very entry level. And I had very little money, because again, I'm 27. Tony paid me, I think, $40,000 a year. And I shit you not, I was like $75. And I was like, well, tomorrow's payday, but I had timed it so that I would land on payday so that I could get off the plane, go get cash, go about my business. So I get off the plane and I go to try and get cash, and they're like, nope. And I was like, what the fuck? And I went to 3 or 4 different places, all different kinds of ATMs. Nope. I have $75 and I have to get from LaGuardia to Midtown Manhattan. And I'm like, no idea how I'm going to do this. And I am panicking. And I'm like, all right, well, shit. I call my bank, and I had a credit union. So they're much friendlier because it's small. And I was like, I got a hold of somebody. I was like, yo, it's payday. I have direct deposit and it's not there. And the woman was like, oh, we got a notification from the issuer to put a hold on the payment. And I was like, what? She's like, well, yeah, I mean, if they say to hold the payment, we hold the payment. And I was like, and I knew it. That's, what else was it? And I got to my interview at Republic, and I think everyone wanted to know what it was like to work at Victory. And I was like, well, Tony just, in the interview, at the end of the interview, they're asking me about Victory. And I was like, oh, Tony just froze my paycheck. I'm like, I'm not sure how I'm going to get back to the airport. And he was like, what?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, yeah. He's like, are you serious? And I was like, 100%. They got me a car service back to the airport. God bless them. Otherwise, I would have been wildly fucked. When I got back to the office to demand to talk, I clearly did not have the balls to talk to Tony about it. But I went to the accounting department, and the woman in accounting was very much absolutely team Tony. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, I literally spoke to my bank today, and they told me that you put a freeze on it. They're like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, fucking Jesus. And they finally released my paycheck 3 days later, miraculously, but it didn't affect anyone else in the company. It was just me.
How long after that did you quit?
3 months. Once I got the job offer at Republic, I think it was immediate. I did one more South by Southwest on Tony's dime, and then I was out. And I also, I'm not a brave person. I will own this. I wrote my resignation email, got my BlackBerry and my Amex, hit send, and literally ran to my car.
Wow.
I was just like, nope. Whatever this is, I don't want a part of it.
It's so unhealthy.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
And then when I got to Republic, I was such a battered child. They were listening to something, and I over the loudspeakers at the office, and I was like, they're not on our label. And they were like, no, but it's good. And I was like, you're allowed to do that? And they were like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, what I did was not normal. Okay, got it. You can listen to other artists at labels? Fucking cool.
Did you for months when you got there just start unleashing all of this shit that was built up and just tell people all the all the dirty laundry?
No, definitely not. Because I came to Republic kind of as the dirty punk rock kid. I absolutely wore Dillinger 4 t-shirts into that office more than once. And so nobody really paid much attention to me. And I was living with the bass player from The Sleeping. Anthony from Bayside was my downstairs neighbor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I became their day-to-day manager shortly thereafter. So I could talk shit about Tony to them, which was nice.
So was Double J, in the beginning, I forgot you said he was working with you at that time, or you met him? Oh, okay.
Double J's was at Victory before I was there and long after.
Yeah, he was there for a decade or something as the creative director.
Yeah.
Or the graphic designer. Yeah. Did you ever get into it with Tony?
A couple of times, but it was for whatever reason, I think Tony respected me because I had a blue collar background. He would just give me, he's like, you think you're so fucking smart and you're mouthing off to me right now and blah, blah, and it would be usually, talking about royalties or something like that. And he's like, you're not fucking smarter than me and blah, blah, blah. And I should have been tossed out on my ass probably a couple of times. But I think he knew that he needed me because I was getting a lot of placements for him. So he kind of let me stay.
After you left, did you keep in touch with anybody at the label?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was a club, after you left Victory, we would all send an email, Rick left. Oh, my God, Rick finally left. Shit like that. Those are still some of my best friends, the people that worked at Victory with me. And they've gone to, to work at other labels and be very successful publicists.
Did you move to New York for Republic?
I did.
Did you feel if you stayed in Chicago, would you have felt a little bit uneasy?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah. Because, you would see these people at shows and Tony wouldn't let you talk to, if Tony found out that you were talking to ex-employees, he'd be very upset. So as an example, I was with The Sleeping at Bamboozle or some kind of New Jersey nonsense.
Yeah, skater surf or Bamboozle.
Something like that. I was with them and a Victory employee was there and saw me talking to my roommate, saw me talking to Sal or whatever and reported back to Tony. And then Sal got a fucking email from Tony you're talking to the enemy and la la la, just stupid shit like that. So he did not want you fraternizing with ex-Victory employees. If he found out about it, he'd be very angry. So I knew that if I stayed in Chicago, I would see these people out and about. And eventually I did see Tony at bars because I came back to Chicago.
What was that like?
Seeing Tony at the bar.
Yeah, what happened?
Tony at one point would still go out, and there was a 4:00 bar that was it's no longer there. It's called Exit. And I would see Tony time from time, at a bar, and he would, either not acknowledge me or whatever. And at this particular time, I was there with somebody that I was previously involved with, and I was getting ready to move to Nashville for the first time. And I was feeling very confident because I had some booze on me. And I was like, I'm buying Tony a shot. And the guy was like, this is not a smart move. And I was like, I don't give a fuck. I'm buying the man a shot. And I was like, I'm going. And I walk over there and I got a shot. And Tony is probably pretty drunk. And he's like, nope, I wouldn't take it. And after I probably 4 minutes of me just being I'm just going to stand here, because I could tell he wasn't in a nasty mood. So I was like, I'm just going to stand here until you do it. And he's like, oh, fucking fine. And he knew where I was going. He knew what company I was going to. He knew who my boss was going to be. I was like, how the fuck does this man know this? I don't even work for you anymore. How do you know who my new boss is? The man is absolutely just beyond odd.
Did you hear the story? It's someone told me this, that he got chased by a band one time out of a club.
So that's very possible. It was probably, I think there's a couple of stories about that. The Metro is obviously like a big venue for us, and he had gotten into like some kind of screaming match with, I want to say, the Audition, like one of the dads up in the VIP balcony, and he got ejected from the Metro, which the Metro employees were very excited to do because he was very demanding when he was there. But that story, I'm not sure. I do know this story, but I don't know who it was.
I feel like I forget who. I have to look this up. I forget who told me this in an interview.
It might be Atreyu. It sounds like an Atreyu thing.
No, it was like some band that would be scary as shit. Hold on, Tony from Victor. I'm like doing a search on my website. What was like, and we're gonna start wrapping this up soon, but what was the general perception of him around Chicago?
Very disliked. Everyone respected him in terms of like, yes, he had started a label and things like that, but he was just really mean to people. He threw his weight around at places, and it was just like at places like the Metro, he would come up to the podium and just be expected to be let in. Like, you're not even on the guest list. You're like, don't you know who I am? Kind of shit. And people at the Metro were not thrilled about that. He was really into himself. That's burns bridges.
What happened to him? Didn't I think Double J said that Tony lives on a farm or something now?
Tony has an urban farm. I know he has goats because a friend of mine owns a business on the same street that Tony lives on. It's the same warehouse with like I was telling you about the Miami Vice kind of decor. But he has goats, and he has like a rooftop garden, and my friend owns a business on the same block, and he's always bitching that Tony takes his goats for a walk and doesn't pick up the goat shit. And so like I will occasionally get pictures of like Tony walking by, like with a goat, just like, here's your fucking boss. And I was like,
who knows if he'll hear this, but do you think if he heard this, he'd reach out to you and be like, what the fuck?
I don't think he cares. He has $30 million.
I feel like someone like that would not be down with anybody saying anything about him.
Here's the thing. Like, I didn't tell anything that was false. Those stories are absolutely verifiable. He had a reputation, and I will acknowledge that he was important in my career and helpful, but also wildly toxic. And he has to know that. He absolutely has to know that.
Have you ever heard of any other interviews out there where someone else has been so transparent?
No. Well, that's not true. Wrote an article. He was a former employee. He was like a sales executive, and he wrote a thing, and it was like a manifesto, essentially. It was like 3 pages long, called The Horror. And if you Google it on like the Wayback Machine, you have to use the Wayback Machine, it'll pop up. And it was this wild and absolutely true like recount of what Tony had done and things like that, and just stories like that. And he found it very hard to get a job after that, in music specifically. I think the time the label doesn't even exist anymore. It's been like 15 years since I was there. And they're funny stories, man. I don't care.
It's surprising that that guy would have had a hard time getting a gig in the music industry if Tony wasn't like really looked up to by anybody else, his peers.
Well, you have to remember though, like he wielded a decent amount of power. Distributors would always fight over like who was going to pick up the Victory catalog because there was money in that, right? If you read distribution, you were going to get that money because that catalog's doing well. Same thing, like if you were a radio promo company, like people wanted Tony's money, and Tony was paying people.
How did other people get it and not the bands then? Like the distro people, I mean, I guess they would have stopped doing it, but someone else would have picked it up. It seems to me that he wouldn't really be paying people anything usually.
I mean, you have to pay for distribution services and things like that. Those are things that you couldn't avoid at that time because physical was so important. You had to have a good partner like Sony Red to get good distribution into the right stores. And that costs money.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that he would have actually, I mean, I guess he knew where he had to spend, and he knew where he can get away with not spending.
Absolutely. Yeah. Listen, the man was very smart. I will give him that. I was talking to an old coworker the other day. 15 years ago, Tony was having stand-up meetings and like huddles. If you do any kind of like project management, you know that's like a pretty common practice. But 15 years ago, having stand-ups and like huddles and discussing bottlenecks, that was pretty, clever. Like Tony was reading some good books, and he was smart. He wrote these very vague kind of documents and come get me. Okay.
Had you heard any other, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because it's not them saying it, but did you hear of any other horror stories after you left?
Oh God, yeah. This one's great. As an example, a band was playing like a very large show, and Tony had gotten in a fight with the band and ordered the staff not to go to the show. If he found out that anyone went to their show, they were all going to get fired on the spot. Just shit like that. I mean, I would hear all kinds of crazy stuff. He never really calmed down. A friend of mine, which is crazy, went to work for him twice. Like, he worked for him during those really bad times, and then he went back to him just recently, like right before it closed, when they had like no bands. And he's like, Tony's really chill now. And I was like, I find that hard to believe. But he went and worked for him a second time after going through all of that shit. He was like, yeah, I'm working at Victory again. And everyone was flabbergasted. And he was like, no, he's great. He's totally nice. And like, he would get into these like drag out fights with employees, like his radio guy, like things like that. And like years later, you see them like hanging at a bar, hugging each other. I'm like, no, like, this guy's a dick. He has like this weird relationship with some people where they're like, he's an asshole, but I love him. And I'm like, all right, that's on you.
All right, well, I'm going to start wrapping this up. Yeah, I mean, I could ask the question if there's a story you've ever wanted to tell, and you haven't before, but like we basically spent an hour and half of you doing that.
So, bitchin', sweet. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so last two questions. One, what would you like to plug? It could be about you, it could be about a friend, it could be about both.
No plugs.
No plugs?
No plugs.
Any bands you're listening to that should check out?
I just found out about this band from the UK. It's the worst band name ever, but it's a great band called Puppy.
Well, there's that band called Pup.
No, it's Puppy. Puppy.
I know, I'm saying like, but Pup is cooler than Puppy though in your eyes.
I mean, yeah, Puppy's a bad band name, but it's like it's like a combination of Smashing Pumpkins and early Weezer, and I love it. So
I'm sold on that then.
Yeah, give it a check out. It's good.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Be as transparent as you can.